Have you ever wondered how the LinkedIn chat feature works? If yes, then you're in the right place. In this video, we are going to take a look at LinkedIn chat, explore all of its features, and in particular, see how we can implement the smart replies feature. Let's get right into it. Hey there guys, how's it going? It is AB this side. I'm an upcoming software engineer at Oracle and finally undergraduate in IIT Guwahati. In this channel, we mostly explore new technologies and we build tutorials where we go ahead and implement real life applications just like this one. So if you are new to this channel, consider subscribing. In this particular video, we are going to take a look at LinkedIn chat and we're going to implement all of its features. So before I go ahead and tell you what all technologies we'll be using today, let's have a look at the final demonstration of the application. So that is how our application will look like at the end of this video. In this video, we'll be using Flutter, Firebase, Radar, and Google's machine learning algorithms. And additionally, we'll also be taking a look at one of the very famous tools for documentation. I have a big announcement to make at the end of this video, so make sure you watch it completely. So now let's have a look at the ingredients of today's application, or basically the technologies and how they're connected to each other. So first off, we have our mobile phone, which is going to run Flutter, and that is going to communicate with Firebase. And here we're going to use the authentication and the Cloud Firestore features. Then we have the machine learning kit by Google, which will be supplying the smart replies. And finally, for our location services, we'll be making use of Radar. Now, I also told you we'll be using a documentation tool. This is actually Docusaurus. So Docusaurus is actually this famous documentation tool, which is a part of Facebook's open source efforts, and it helps you generate wonderful documentation websites by writing just Markdown. It also has the React support, so you can write sort of an extended Markdown where you can include more features into your Markdown files. And we have also generated our own little documentation website corresponding to this video, which I'll show you in a bit. Now, for people who are not familiar with Firebase, it's actually the Google's flagship product for application and web development. Technically, it's backend as a service, which means it provides you all the features of the backend without you having to write them or build them from scratch, and that makes the process of development just much faster. And then we have Radar. So for people who have watched my previous videos, I have used Mapbox to show you how you can do geofencing or even stuff like reverse geocoding. So in this case, we are going to use Radar for that. There is no reason why you cannot use Mapbox or Google Maps. I just wanted to introduce you to a new thing, and in this case, it's Radar. Finally, we have Google's machine learning kit. So Google's ML Kit is actually this machine learning expertise of Google that is brought into mobile phone. And what happens is it actually processes all these powerful algorithms on your device itself, which means things become much faster as compared to if you have them on a server running. And there are a lot of APIs here. So we have Vision APIs, but the one we'll be needing for our case is actually the smart reply, which comes under the natural language processing APIs, and it will help us generate smart replies for our conversation, which we'll be seeing once we actually work on the application. For the purpose of this video, we have the starter application in place, which is actually some basic LinkedIn UI and some LinkedIn chat UI, on the top of which we will build our final application. So I'll put a link to the description below. You can go ahead and check that out, and let's have a look at the repository and the website together now. So this is the repository I was telling you about, and this is how it looks right now. Based on the time of your viewing, it might be slightly different. But what we're interested in is actually these two folders. So 101 Smart Replies is actually the current project, and this documentation slash LinkedIn clone documentation is the Docusaurus project that we have. So we will come to the starter project later on, but if we have a look at the website, this is the beautiful website that we have built using Docuseries. And the good thing about it is it was built very fast because most of it is actually Markdown. And what we'll do now is let's move on to tutorial and go to the chat smart replies, and inside setup let's have a look at all these steps that we have to take to make sure that our starter application is up and running. So if you remember last time we were writing these using Markdown, so I thought let's go ahead and use Docuseries for that now, so that things are a bit more organized. And I'll also be sharing the link to this particular website in the description, so you don't have to worry about that. Now, in getting started, you must first clone the repository, and obviously you have to go to this particular starter project inside this folder. And then what you have to do is you have to set up Radar. So Radar is, as I've already mentioned, is a leading geofencing platform that we have. And once you have actually signed up and completed all the other formalities, you'll be greeted with your dashboard, which will look something like this. And in the dashboard, you have this thing called a live publishable client. So that is the API key corresponding to your client side, which you'll be needing. So go ahead and copy that, and inside your assets config environment file, you can go ahead and paste it here, like I have done. And the format of that key will be something similar to PRJ live PK, and then some set of characters. And once that is done, Radar is configured for you. The next thing you have to do is Firebase. So Firebase, as I've mentioned, is the backend as a service platform. And the first thing to do here is to create a project. And once you have created your new project, you have to add your applications in there. Now, this is extensively documented inside Firebase docs, so you don't have to worry about not finding resources or being lost. So what you have to do is just create 3 applications, and then keep in mind that you are following all of these 4 points. So the first point is to enable all the features that you'll need. In our case, for this video, we're going to need basically the authentication feature and the cloud Firestore, so which is actually this Firestore database feature. And then make sure that you have your authentication enabled for Google, GitHub, and email password. Make sure you add your SHA keys to the project, and you'll find a link to that in the help option when you're adding your Android application basically. And finally, make sure that you download these 2 files. So the Google service info.property list and Google services.json, and put them in appropriate places inside your project so that Firebase is done. The last step, which is recommended. So right now, Flutterfire is the most famous thing being used to integrate Flutter applications with Firebase. So Flutterfire has this CLI tool which you can directly use, and once you run these 2 commands, you'll have a Firebase options.dart which will be generated for you. And if you notice in the main.dart file in our starter project, you have these lines that is actually expecting this Firebase options.dart file to be present. So once you complete this, your Firebase setup will be done basically. Then you have Google Login. So for Google Login, we'll be using Google Sign-In, the plugin for that, and you can go here and also check it out. But what's important is for iOS, you go ahead and add these these lines in your info.property list, and there you'll already find these lines in the starter project, but you have to replace this particular line with your own reverse client ID that you'll find inside your Google service info.property list file. So that being done, you would be good to go with Google Login. Now, this is just for information that we can go ahead and implement a sign-in with Apple, and it is mandatory if you are submitting your application to Apple Store. But in our case, we are not going to do that, so you can just go ahead and ignore it. Finally, you have GitHub login. So I have attached links to the plugin here, that is GitHub Sign-In, and also you can take a look at it. But before that, you have to create your own OAuth application, and you'll also find the steps for that in GitHub Docs, which I have also attached a link to in our website. And you see here how you can create, authorize, and scopes and all that. And you need to save these 3 things, basically 2 things, that is client ID and client secret. And the redirect URL, you'll be getting it from Firebase itself when you're trying to activate the GitHub login. So once you go ahead and do that, you'll quite easily understand what I'm saying. Finally, that's all you have to do, and then you should be able to get your application up and running. And I will show you how the starter projects looks like in a minute. So, did you find the documentation useful? If yes, then go ahead and let me know if you want me to make a video on DocuSeries. So, building the website that you just saw needed to write some Markdown and also a little bit of configurations in JavaScript, and then we hosted that using GitHub Pages. So, overall, I could build something like that and show DocuSeries to you in action, and also learn more about all the features that DocuSeries has. So you can let me know in the comments below if you want me to have a video like that. Let's continue and take a look at our starter application now. So I have my starter application opened in Android Studio, and I also have my iPhone emulator open on the side, so that we can run our application and see our application on the emulator. And first of all, what I want to show you is all the folders that we have in here, and then I'll show you the application. So meanwhile, while I'm explaining the folders, let me just go ahead and try launching that in here, so that we save some time. Now first of all, I would like to mention that this particular starter project which we have here is not a very basic project, because it's actually connected to Firebase, and we are making use of the Cloud Firestore and the Firebase authentication, as well as making use of a app-wide state management using MobX and providers. So if you're unfamiliar with any of those things, you can just go ahead and let me know in the comments, and we will have videos where we build those things from scratch, and I will explain you the concepts that are involved, so that you're not lost. So anyway, coming back to the starter project here, we have these folders here. So we do have a helpers folder where we have all the helper functions, and then we have the models, in which case we have only one model, which is the user model. We have the request folder where we store all the requests that we are making to Firebase, or let's say the Radar API in our case, for reverse geocoding. Then we have all the screens that are used in the application. So maybe the initial setup screen, which is coming before the main application, such as login and gathering basic user information, or the chat screen. We also have the services folder, which have things like handling exceptions and validations. And then we have the stores. So I mentioned it earlier that we are maintaining an app-wide state. So this is what we are using for that. So let's say we are having a store for the chat, or store for management of authentication, or store for management of user details and variables. So these are actually the store, the files inside the stores folder. Then we have the widgets. So corresponding to each and every screen, we might need to use some widgets, or maybe we are trying to make some UI widgets which are being used in multiple screens. So that is when the widgets folder come into play. And then I have already spoken to you about Firebase options, and then we have the main.dart. So main.dart, you see here, we are actually using a multi-provider, and we are using all these stores as providers. And whenever we are trying to use them, maybe we will wrap our the return function, or the widget that we're returning, with a consumer, and then consume the variables inside that particular store. And then when you're trying to make a big application, it's always recommended you have your routes well organized, instead of randomly routing here and there inside the application using navigator. You should use named routes. So that's why we have a routes.dart file here, where we have mapped all our route names, and these IDs are actually the route names corresponding to each and every file that we have. So that is all about the folder structure. Now if we go ahead and run the application, so we see that first of all it is trying to access my location, which I will allow, and then I see my splash screen. After that I see this screen. So this is the screen where I can actually log in with Google or log in with GitHub. So both of them have been implemented. Now when we have multiple social authentications with the same parameter, in this case the email ID, there can be some complications, but we will talk about that in a later video. But for now, if I just click on Google, then I am actually prompted to sign in with Google. And similarly, I'll just cancel it and show you the GitHub one. If I click on continue to GitHub, I see this thing on my application where I can use my GitHub username and password to log in basically. So let me just quickly log in at Google, and I will show you the rest of the application. Alright, so I have put my username and password, and then I will complete the two-step verification. And after that, I will show you the application. So the Google authentication has completed, and now I am actually seeing the second screen, which is asking me to confirm my location. So this is where we have made use of radar, and if you go to radar geocoding.dart, you see an example radar request that we are making, and we are trying to get our address from latitude and longitude. So why are we doing this? We'll know that later on. But we are just fetching the user location, and then we have the LinkedIn user interface, the standard LinkedIn user interface. So if I mark that I'm a student, I have to fill in my degree type, graduation year, and school name. Otherwise, I have to fill in my most recent job title, employment type, and most recent company. So for this, I will just say something like software engineer, and let's say full time, and let's say Oracle for my company. And if I go next, I see a preview. So I have my photo, which I'm actually gathering from the Google login. And then I have my name also gathered from Google login. And then I have my tagline here. And then if I go and next, and then it asks me if I'm looking for a job or not, and then I'll just say not now. So the thing is that for each of the information we have entered previously, that is actually being stored both in your application wide state and also in the cloud Firestore, which is storing all this data. And then in the application we have some of the basic screens. So we have a home screen, network screen, a screen for creating posts, for notification, and for jobs. And then we have the drawer widget, where we have the user profile information and a sample LinkedIn like UI. But if I go to settings, I see the settings here, and of here the most important one is sign out. So if I click on sign out, I'm actually signed out of the application. Now that will ask me to log in again, but this time it will remember my previous login because of the iOS features. And then I can have a look at the chat screen. So this is a very standard screen that I have, and it's actually emulating the LinkedIn chat UI. And inside of each of these, I have a completely blank chat screen, so which we have not yet implemented. So this is part of what we will do in this video. So let's go ahead and start working on this actually. All right. So first of all, what we'll talk about is the chat list file, which you'll find inside the screens chat folder. And in here, we have this function of onPressed handler. Now this onPressed handler is a function that we are calling when I'm actually clicking on this list style. And as you must have observed, all of this is actually hard-coded data because right now the user is not connected to other users. We have not implemented LinkedIn connections, which we'll see later on. But what we have is we have the onPressed handler here, and we have hard-coded the IDs and the images for a user called Mary and a user called AB. So now this ID which we have here corresponding to these users are actually the ID which are returned back to us from the Firebase authentication console, and we are directly using that. So if you are trying to build this application, it's recommended that you create another ID. So I have a ID for my own account, and I have one more account, Google account, which goes by the name of Mary Jane, and I'm using its particular details as well, so that I can actually chat between two devices. So I'll show that to you later on when we chat between two devices after the application has built to some extent. And what we need to keep in mind is there are two important terms here. So we have a term called peer, and we have a term called local. So the local user is the person who is actually using the mobile phone, and the peer user is the person to whom the local user is actually talking to. So in my case, if I am actually logged in with AB's account, I am trying to talk to Mary, and similarly if I am logged in with Mary's account, I am trying to talk to AB. So in this case, what I have to do is I have to check if the ID through which I am logged in is actually equal to Mary or AB, and correspondingly I am setting the peer IDs and the local IDs and images and names and stuff. So Mary user exists in the Firestore database, and so does AB's user. So we are fetching the data of those users, and we are storing them in user data, and then we are also maintaining the app-wide state of the chat store, and we are storing some of the values such as peer ID, user data, peer image, and image. And you'll find that inside the chat store. If you go in here, you see all those things we are needing. So name, headline, images. We're also storing the chat messages. So right now this is not very obvious, but when we are trying to generate suggestions, we might want to store the previous 10 or 20 chat messages, or maybe in our case all the chat messages, so that we are actually generating reasonable suggestions or smart replies. So after this is done, we push them to the chat screen, which is the next screen here. And that is something you'll find inside the chat screen file. For this, you have to go to widgets and you have to look at the chat folder inside the widgets, and you'll find a lot of folders in here, some of which we will be actually implementing. Now this is a blank screen right now, but there are a few things of interest here. We do have a name here which comes by default, I mean in the starter application, but I kept it there just so that I can tell you how things are working. So in the last page, we fetched the user information corresponding to Mary's ID from Firebase, and then we are making use of this chat store.peer name, and we are making use of the consumer, and then this is actually displaying the Mary Jane as the title of the application bar. Other than that, we have a video calling button here which is not implemented yet, and we do have a delete conversation which we will implement in this video later on, and finally we have a chat window that has been called. Now I'd like to point out here that all these 5 widgets that we see here are the 5 things we'll be implementing in this particular video, and the chat window is actually the scrollable list of messages that we'll be having. The chat window user will be a user details information thing that will be showing on the top of that, and then the chat input is something that we'll use to input our chat, that is to send messages, and the chat suggestions will come up on the top of the chat input over here, which will be actually showing us the smart replies or the suggestions. So the next thing we can do is actually going to chat window user, and since we have already fetched the peer name from the chat store, let's actually fetch the peer information such as the image and whatever name and the title or the designation of that particular person, like you saw in the preview screen. For me it showed that I was a software engineer at Oracle. So similarly, let's actually fetch Mary's information and then show it here, so that we can proceed further. Alright, so I'm inside the chat window user file now, and the first thing I'll do is to set the network image here to the image of Mary, and that I'll do by saying chat store dot peer image. Now this is no longer a constant, so I'll remove the constant here, and I'll also add a constant here. And for the name, I'll just use the same way, and I'll say chat store dot peer name. And for this one, what I'll do is I'll say okay, not like that, I'll say chat store dot peer headline. Okay, and it's no longer a constant. All right, so what we have done here is we have actually fetched the information that was inside the app wide state, and that is actually using the chat store, which is having all this information, the observables as in Mobix terms, that is peer image, peer name, and peer headline. And next what we can do is we'll just go to chat window, and you see that chat window has a couple of things. So we have some initializations here, which is just fetching the user name, information, ID and stuff, and actually storing it inside variables to be used. And we have a build item, which is actually how one single text that is sent from the local user to the peer user looks like. And then we have a build list messages, which I will later on build and show you all the messages basically, and make a scrollable list of messages. And finally we have the widget build function, which has a column inside which we are supposed to fit all this. So the first thing that we have, since we have just completed it now, let's go ahead and write that. So I'll call it window user. Okay, it's chat window user. And if I do this, and I also add a divider in between so that it's just like sort of clearly differentiated. Now on running my application, that is on doing hot reload, I can see that I have Mary's information here right now. So I have Mary Jane, and we do have software engineer at Microsoft. So now behind the scenes, I created Mary's account and I filled a different information, and that is being stored right now. I'll show you the Firebase and all this information later on after we have implemented the chat features and we are able to talk between two devices, and then we'll go ahead and implement the suggestions. But here we have the information of Mary completely. One more thing which you can do is to have a look at the chat input file. So chat input widget right now has a bunch of UI stuff. So since we're trying to actually implement the LinkedIn chat UI, so we do have a bit of animations which I will show you in a minute. And what we can do is over here we'll later on add our suggestions, but for now we'll just add the chat input directly inside chat window. So you see add the chat input stuff here. So I'll say chat input. And if I again hot reload my application, I get this chat input thing here. Now you must be wondering why there is no space in between. So don't worry about that. We'll fix that soon once we have the build list message widget in place. And this is the animation I was talking to you about. So we have all these features here. We can add attachments, or open the camera, add videos, photos, GIFs, or mention people. So these are things which we'll look on in future videos, but for now we will actually focus on the Cupertino text widget here. And the Cupertino text widget is sort of being controlled by a text editing controller, and that text editing controller will have information for the text message that I'm trying to send. So I'm using the submit message handler for that, and I have a few other functions like toggling the animation, or fetching the chat ID pair. One thing I would like to mention as well, in the chat window, we have something called a group chat ID, which is actually generated from the helper function. So what it does is it just adds a hyphen between the ID and the peer ID, and it is used to identify basically a pair of chat messages. So that's the way in which you're going to store information in Firestore, which I will show you again later on. So now that this is done, let's go ahead and implement the chat window now. Work on the build list messages, and actually show the the chat between two devices. So inside the build list message widget that we have here, instead of the container, now we'll go ahead and actually return a stream builder. So that stream builder that we're going to return is actually going to fetch a stream from Firebase, fetch the data from Firebase, and then return the list of messages that we want to show on the screen. So let me just go ahead and implement that, and then I'll talk to you about the details. All right. So what have we done here? We are actually using Stream Builder to listen to a stream from Firebase, which is storing data inside a collection called messages, and a document with the ID of group chat ID, and creating another collection inside the document with the ID of group chat ID. Now we are doing this because there is a limit on the number of basically the amount of data you can store inside one document. So the nested collection inside the document allows you to store more number of messages, and then we are actually trying to order this stream based on the timestamp, and we are doing that in descending order. And finally we are fetching the snapshots out of that. Now we are returning a circular progress indicator here, but that's not what we want to do. Instead, what you're going to do is actually we have to check if the snapshot has some data or not. So the condition that we'll do is if not of snapshot dot has data, and in that particular case only you want to return the circular progress indicator. And in the else case, that is whenever the snapshot has some data, in this case we are going to return basically the list of messages that we have. So let me go ahead and show that how I can do it. We must add a query snapshot category here so that this thing works. And then what we'll do is we'll run a loop, and what I'll do is I'll say from list message dot length -1, and for I greater than equal to 0, and I minus minus, and inside this loop we are going to add the chat messages to the chat messages variable I actually showed you before in fact. And we have a function there, add chat messages, and the text will be list message of I, of course, and dot get, and this time it's content because that's the chat content that we have. And also the list message has one more thing, which is dot get ID from. So it's actually saying from whom this chat message has been sent. So we are going to use that ID from. Okay. So that is done here, and then we actually return our list view builder. So I say return list view dot builder, and the item builder in fact takes in two things, that is context. So context and index, and then we do this. Okay. So inside here we have to again actually return a build item, and the build item I showed you up here, this is the thing. So it represents one of the chat messages basically, and the build item is going to take an index and the document, and the document will be snapshot dot data dot docs, and I'm going to take make sure that it's not null. So for that I'll add this here, one more bracket on this side as well, and what we'll do is we'll make sure it's not null, and then we'll take the index of that, and then we are gonna go, because it's actually expecting the document, so we are specifying the particular document corresponding to that. In fact, we can use the arrow function here instead of those things. All right, item builder is done. What we have next is actually padding. So I'm going to remove the padding here. We'll add a padding later on outside this one. I don't want padding between messages. And then I have item count. So yes, you guessed it. It's from snapshot data dot docs dot length. So how many documents are there? And we are going to set reverse to be true, because I want the first message, or the earliest message to come first, and then we're going to specify controller list scroll controller. So this actually offers sort of animation, so that I'm always at the end of the list, and I'm actually managing it from inside the chat store itself. Okay, now one more thing that we have to do is to wrap our stream builder with a widget, and that widget is expanded. And also we don't want to show the stream builder all the time. We want to add a condition here that if the group chat ID is equal to this. So the idea here is I cannot fetch messages if I have some issue fetching messages, or if I'm actually waiting for the message to load. So I'll be showing a circular progress indicator in that case as well, and I'll say center child circular progress indicator. Okay, and if my group chat ID is not equal to space, I'm going to show the stream builder. Finally, just let's add a padding to the list view builder. So I'll add a padding here, and I'm going to add an indentation to the left, let's say of okay, not like this, of only, and a left of 10 indentation. Okay, so now what we can do is we can just go ahead and use the build list message directly in our build context, I mean now in our widget build function, and we have to remove the constant here and add it to all this, so because this is no longer a constant now. Okay, so if I save this right now, I can see that I'm actually seeing Mary Jane, and you see that the expanded thing has shown up here. And now if I go ahead and type a message, let's say I say hi Mary, then I can actually see this hi Mary coming from me. I also see the date and the time of the particular message and the person who actually sent that message. Now behind the scenes I have went and actually run this application in another emulator. So let me quickly open that, and this is basically the device of Mary Jane. And Mary Jane also sees that AB Satyaprakash has actually texted her with the name of hi Mary. So she can go ahead and say hi AB, and this will reflect on both devices now. So now this also works if I send multiple messages from one device, like if I say hi AB and I say what's up, so that also shows up in both of these devices. Now one more thing which we have to implement is the delete messages thing here that we have. So let me just go ahead and do that quickly, and what I'll do is in here I'll again try to access the Firestore. So I'll say Firebase Firestore.instance, and the same collection that we specified previously, I will actually go ahead and copy paste that, this here, and paste it. So, and once you're in here, I'll say dot get and a dot then, and inside that I'll be expecting a snapshot as a value, And what I will do is with this snapshot, I will go ahead and run a loop here. So I'll say for document snapshot ds in snapshot.docs. I'll delete each and every document snapshot. So that's done by ds.reference.delete. So since we have this, all this data inside documents inside the collection, so I'm deleting all the documents inside that particular collection to make sure that all the information in there is actually deleted. All right. So now it's saved, and if I go ahead and click on delete conversation, it actually, hold on, I have to choose the proper device again. Okay, now it's saved. If I go ahead and delete conversation, yes, it's deleted from here. Now the interesting thing is it is also deleted from the other device that we had here, and this is something which might not be desirable. For example, in Telegram you have this feature, but you might want to delete from one device. In that particular case, you can go ahead and delete it from your local storage, or just modify the way things are being stored in Firestore, and you'll be able to achieve that goal basically. If you have watched the video so far, congratulations, because you have just successfully completed your first chat application using the LinkedIn like UI. Now, before I go ahead and show you how the Firebase looks like right now and also implement the smart replies, which is kind of the main aim of this project, I would like to request you to like this video and basically subscribe to my channel if you found value in this video, and also stay tuned till the end so that you can listen to the announcement that we're going to make. Let's have a look at Firebase now. So this is how the Firebase Firestore database is looking right now. So we have the users. So we have two users here. We have me and we have Mary. And for each of these users, we actually have all the information of those users. So things like their location, latitude and longitude, things like their name and basically their employment type, job title, recent company, the address which we got from Radar. And remember, these are all the details that we have filled, at least in my case, and similarly in Mary's case. And also looking for job is student and student details and all these things. So whatever we filled is actually present inside the users collection. Similarly, inside messages collection, I have told this to you before, but I'll still reiterate. We have a document inside the messages collection, and inside that document we have another collection with the same name. Now, and this collection further has documents inside it. So all the documents inside this particular collection actually have the ID equal to the timestamp of that particular message that is being sent, and then we are actually storing them in here. And then we see that we have the content and the ID from the ID2 and the timestamp. So that is what actually is how we are storing the data in Firestore database right now. And you also have authentication, where the user details and those who have authenticated, that is being stored. And you also have the sign in method, where we're using Google, GitHub and email password. Make sure these are enabled, as I've already mentioned before. So that's how I think all about Firebase right now. Let's go ahead and start implementing smart suggestions. So right now we're inside the chat suggestions file, and what we are going to do first of all is going to declare a few variables. So let's do that first. Okay, so we have basically declared a few variables here. We have the ID, peer ID, group chat ID, and we have a list of suggestions which we have initialized with some random suggestions. Next, what we'll do is go ahead and basically fetch the IDs and the group chat ID, and we'll do that inside the fetch chat ID pair. Okay, so now inside the fetch chat ID pair, we have actually made use of the user store and the chat store, and using the provider.op of process, we have actually fetched the user ID, the peer ID, and also obtained the group chat ID. Now we are going to use the chip widget, and since we want to display those small buttons above this, So the chip wizard will come in handy, but we want to customize this chip wizard a little bit. We want to add some gesture detector on the top of that, so that whenever I'm trying to, actually submit the messages, or I'm trying to click on one of those suggestions, it actually gets into Firestore, and it's actually submitted as a message, or basically a message is sent. So we are going to do that right now, and for that we'll be using the expanded and the gesture detector widgets. Alright, so the label of that particular chip that we have is actually being used as the content for the on send message, and then we are also providing the group chat ID and the ID of the person who is sending that message. Right now this is actually done, and what we have to do next is work on the get suggestions function. So in here we'll be making use of the smart replies plugin. So as we have already seen before, it's a part of the Google ML kit, but it's very well implemented in this plugin called smart replies, which we already have inside this particular project. And what I'll do is I'll say list old suggestions, and I'll call this as equal to suggestions, and then I'll say suggestions equal to await, and constant, and we'll use smart reply now. Now smart reply actually has this function called suggest replies, and the text messages is the messages that we want it to have, so we'll call it messages basically, which is being sent in here, and then we will actually call set state. Now, why are we doing this? Because we want to go ahead and reload or rebuild our widget tree once we have the suggestions, so that the new suggestions keep coming in every time a message is being sent. Now, you don't want to do this though. The primary reason is you will fall into an infinite loop if you do this, because the get suggestions method is kind of going to be called inside the widget build function, and every time a widget is built, I am calling get suggestions and I'm rebuilding the widget. So that will cause your application to go into an infinite loop. So to prevent that, we'll just do a very simple thing. I'll compare if my old suggestions is different from my new suggestion. So for that, we have this amazing function called list equals, and what we will do is we will compare the two lists here. So the first list is actually old suggestion, and the new list is actually suggestions. And if and only if this statement holds, that is if it's not the same, so I'll add a not here as well. So if it's not the same, only then I will be setting my state. So this is a safeguard against that. Now finally, I'll go ahead and work on the widget build function. So we'll be using a stream builder again here, and the aim of that stream builder will be to make sure that every time this new message comes in, and basically it's listening to that stream, so I should be updating my suggestions. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so that completes the widget build. Let me tell you what we have done here. We have a stream in here that is actually listening to Firebase Firestore, and it's actually checking if a message has been added. And this is the same stream that we were using earlier to display the messages. And then every time actually a change is being made here, I'm going ahead and calling the get suggestion function and checking if the new suggestion that I'm getting is actually different from the older suggestions or not. So if it's any different from the older suggestions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rebuild the widget, and then what is the widget tree actually rendering for the suggestions. We are rendering this padding, which is basically the parent of a row, and the row is going to have three suggestions which are being rendered by the chip widgets that we have shown above. So this is how we have actually implemented the chat suggestions file. So let's go ahead and run this. Basically, let's try running this in both of the devices like we did before, and let's have a look at if the suggestions are coming in or not. Now, one more thing that we need to do before we can actually test this on devices is actually adding the chat suggestions here in the chat input. So this is actually part of the chat input file, which I forgot to mention. So you can just put chat suggestions here like this, and the rest everything should work. Also make sure that it's actually a constant because we want to add the constant modifier there. So now we can run this and then go ahead and test it out. Alright, so I have the two devices, my iPhone 12 Pro and iPhone 12 emulators, and I'll be running basically the applications in both of them. So let's go ahead and write hi Mary in this one, and that shows up here. And let me say hi AB here, and that also shows up here. Now let's say I want to ask Mary that, what's up, and that shows up here on Mary's device. And it's great that Mary is now getting suggestions, so she may go ahead and say something like nothing much, and then I'll say, oh, okay. And then she may ask, how are you? And then maybe I'll say, I'm good, or maybe good you. And corresponding to that, she also understands that it's actually I'm good. Now I pressed good you both, two times. That's why we got the message twice. But we can see that basically our suggestions, the smart replies feature is working completely. And what we wanted to show initially in the initial video where we saw the final result, it's exactly the same thing that we have successfully built together now. So pat yourself on the back, and let's actually look at the conclusion of the video. Whoa, so I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. And building this application actually taught us the smart replies, which is a very important concept because in most of the modern applications, especially let's say the Outlook or Gmail and other professional applications, we do have these smart replies implemented so that you can actually reply back to emails that you have received quickly without having to type a new email or similar such circumstances. So now that you have learned it, it's actually easy for you to go ahead and implement it in various applications that you might be building. Coming to the part of the big announcement I had already mentioned that we'll be doing at the end of the video, and I'm not sure if it's completely a surprise for you by now because I have been dropping hints here and there, but starting from this video we are actually launching our own LinkedIn clone series in which we'll be implementing most of the famous features of LinkedIn which are very noticeable and from which you can actually learn a lot. So it's actually a list of all these features that we have. We will be implementing the chat features, the user profile feature, user connections, user feed, creating posts, and social authentication and linking of user accounts, as well as for receiving notifications on your phone. Now for each of these features I have included the possible set of tech stacks which I might be using for them, and although that might change with time, so we'll discuss more on that when those particular videos come into being. And if your favorite video did not make the list, then what do you have to do? Just go to the comment section and put your comment down there, and I'll read your comments and I'll see if those features are actually feasible and if they're important to implement. Then definitely I'll go ahead and make a video on that as well. So your comment matters. And one more important thing that we have to remember is that of course these are not all the features of LinkedIn has way more features because it was implemented over a matter of years and by various software engineers from all over the world. So but what we are covering here will actually cover things at a very basic level and help you understand how big applications like LinkedIn work, even if we actually scale them down to a basic level. So in the next video we'll have a look at the first feature in the list, that is the additional chat features such as video calling or adding of images messages and other stuff into the chat, LinkedIn chat. And so until then, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one.